Okay, welcome to Teacher Training Plus, our high school equivalency or HSE instruction session. Next. So this session is by Kara, and it is entitled, Why Do I Have to Read This? So it's really great to have you, Kara, again. Just a few reminders. Let's use the chat to introduce yourself, share links, any resources, and ask questions of your fellow attendees. The Q&A is really for content questions and will be answered by either myself or Kara. If you have a problem, please use the raise your hand feature. And one of the ProLiteracy representatives, myself or otherwise, will help you through that technical problem. If you want to view captions, please click the show caption button, and you can see the transcript and or change the language as necessary. So you will receive a follow-up email with the webinar recording, the PowerPoint, and your certificate of attendance. The chat and the Q&A transcripts, membership information, and scholarship information as well will come to you with that follow-up email. So we are expanding our coaching to be workshop sessions. They are small group workshop sessions that expand on the webinar topic from the one you're attending today and give you a chance to think about applying it to your particular context. It takes place the week following the webinar and is limited to 25 participants per session. It provides you an opportunity to ask questions, share ideas with the presenter or the other members of the group. And Kara will talk more about this in a little bit. Go ahead. These are the registration links, and we'll make sure that they go into the chat momentarily. Each of the workshops is the 16th, 17th, and 18th. The first one, and you can register for any of them or all of them. It's deeper exploration of the webinar topic. The second one is modeling reading strategies with activities. And the third one's lesson planning around the webinar topic. Go ahead. And additional resources, as you know, New Readers Press Material Scholarship is valued at $1,000. Click the link that will be in the chat momentarily, and you can get a book set for students and teachers. But scholarships are limited, so please click that link at some point and apply for it. You get a free one-year individual membership for participating in a TTP webinar only once. So if you have not used that benefit, please go and click that link so that you can apply for that free one-year membership. Deadlines is 11/5, so please click those links. As you know, we have an election coming up, and it's really important that our students are civically engaged and knowledgeable before they head to the voting booth. Please make sure you take a look at our really interesting and informative free interactive voting guide that comes to you from News for You. There's an interactive voting guide as well as the resource. The guide explains who can vote and why every vote counts, describes how people in the U.S. choose their leaders and how to register to vote. Thank you. Now I'll pass it over to Kara.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I wanted to let you know I am going to turn off my camera just so that we can focus on the presentation at hand, but I just wanted you all to see my face and so that I could introduce myself. So thank you so much all for being here today, and thank you Maribel for the introduction, and thank you Danielle for being on the back end, and thank you of course to the whole ProLiteracy team and our ability to make Teacher Training Plus happen for the third year. It's very exciting to be here, and I'm so happy to be a part of this project. Today, what we are going to talk about is how to help those resistant readers. And often when I have first day conversations with my students and we go over their TABE results, some of the most common things that I hear are, oh, I don't like math. Oh, I hate math. I'm so bad at it. But it's far less likely for me to hear, oh, I hate reading, or oh, I'm a bad reader. But that doesn't mean that our students aren't struggling with it. It's interesting how in society it seems to be more socially acceptable, and sometimes even things people can bond over. I have been one to tell, oh, I come from a family of engineers, but I'm not very good at math. It's more socially acceptable, though, to talk about how we may not feel comfortable with math. However, it's a lot less likely and something that we'll hear people say, oh, I'm a bad reader, or oh, I don't like reading. And today I kind of want to explore some of that, and I also want to help those students who may be struggling with this, but might not have the confidence to say that or share it, or the comfortability with it. Because often what we'll find is, especially when we're working with students on those HSE level texts, that is when it'll come out that they are resistant to it. And that's when we'll hear, oh, why do I have to read this? So today, that's what we're going to explore. All right, I'm going to turn my camera off because the next slide has a picture of me. All right, so I just wanted to let everybody know, if you have been with me before, and I've seen some familiar names in the chat, thank you so much for coming again. I'm so glad we've made it to year 3. For any of you that are new to the program, I'm so glad you're here. As Maribel said, there are lots of resources available. The conversation does not stop here today. This is a way for us to begin that conversation, but as those of you know who have been with me before in my presentations, I like to make it as interactive as possible. This is something where I want to hear from you. I want your feedback. So please feel free. I'm going to ask you to participate in the chat. I'm going to ask you to participate in a poll. Please do so. But then let's follow up. Those workshops are designed so that we can continue this conversation. And I want to make sure we have the opportunity to do so. And also, I love getting to talk with everyone over webinar and over Zoom. However, what I would like even more is to get to meet you in person. So if you are attending the ProLiteracy Conference, hint, you should attend the ProLiteracy Conference. I bet you Danielle will even put the link in the chat to register. Please, please, please come and say hello. I will be presenting, and I will also be presenting with the wonderful Stephen Reed, who teaches our English language learners track. So please come say hi, please come engage, because it's wonderful to get to have these spaces, but it's even better to be able to see each other in person, continue those conversations beyond just this hour that we have together today. All right. I always purposefully title my presentations based on common student questions, and especially when I talk to students about reading those HSE level texts, I hear, why do I have to read this? I'm just wondering, as an instructor, as a tutor, how do you respond when a student says some of these things? Why do I have to read this? I don't get this. I don't read for fun. Or, oh, reading is boring. My English major heart and my English teacher heart just cries over that one. But how do you respond when students say those things? Please put it in the chat. What are some of the ways you respond to students when you hear that? All right, Bridget, thank you for being the first one. Yes, okay. I'm a teacher, I'm not scared of silence, so I will wait for you. Excellent. It helps you learn skills that you need in your life. I get it, reading is hard, yes. How would you present this information? Reading is a life skill. Excellent. Yeah, we've already discussed their goals, so I tell it how it will help them. You guys are awesome. Yeah, Maribel, sometimes I say read something that interests you to get practice. Excellent. Yeah, I appreciate all of those responses. And again, why? Oh, Deborah, thank you. Ask students why. Exactly. Why do they think reading is boring or why don't they enjoy it? And often when students are saying these things, what's underneath the surface is I struggle with this. This is something that I may not feel fully comfortable with. And then, okay, I hear we just need to practice reading more. What we want to be careful of, though, is when we're helping students, when they say these things, especially when they're resistant, we want to try to emphasize that we are going to work on this together, but also as an instructor, we don't want to burden our students with our expectations. We want to be careful to make sure that even though, as I mentioned, I'm an English teacher and I think reading is so much fun, that may not always be the case for all of our students, that it may be something that we have to help them develop those skills. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about how do we do that, especially when we're working at that high school equivalency level. All right. So by the end of today, I want to make sure you're able to walk away with very specific techniques to help students. And one of the first things that we can do is to help make sure that students understand what reading comprehension means for everyday life. Yes, I see some of you have mentioned that reading is everywhere and that this is something we do every single day. So one of the first things we can do is define reading comprehension and how students are using it all the time. And then, of course, how do we use it within the context of those HSE tests? Because once we have an understanding of what reading comprehension actually entails, then we're able to apply those skills to all sections of the test. And I want to stress all sections of the HSE test. This is something that students might not see when they first start their journey with us, but reading comprehension is needed for all facets of it because comprehension does not just exist in this academic context. It's not siloed, right, to one part of life. It is in every facet of life. But then one thing we need to consider when we are working with our students, so I really appreciated it when someone said, why? Yeah, if your response is why, this is wonderful, because what we want to do is make sure that we understand where our students are coming from and help them overcome any negative experiences or psychological barriers associated with reading. As I mentioned before, it's interesting that people feel so much more comfortable to share, oh, I don't like math, or oh, this is something that, I kind of just have a block with it. Well, that same thing happens with reading, but it's not as common to hear it. And we want to make sure that we know where our students are coming from so they can move beyond that. And then we are going to talk about reading as an active and creative process. I really want to stress that creative piece because this is something that is needed in every aspect of reading, but it's something that also takes it beyond just what's on the page and can help our students then maybe, hopefully, see the fun and the joy in reading as well. So before we get started though, I'm going to ask you to read a little passage for me. So please take 2 minutes. I'm going to give 2 minutes to read this passage. Then I'll have Danielle post some poll questions, just 2 questions. What we're going to do is when the poll goes up, it may cover your passage, but you can move the poll around your screen if you'd like so that you can see the passage again. But I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to read and then let's say a minute and a half to answer those questions. Easy, right? Okay, go ahead. 2 minutes to read first. right, so we've got a little bit more time just to read. I love the comments coming through. All right, Danielle, will you post those poll questions? Excellent. And take about, minute and a half. Oh, I see those answers coming in. How we doing? You guys are getting it. You're catching on. Okay. Wait, a couple more participants. We have more participants who haven't had an opportunity to answer yet. So we'll give it 30 more seconds. Thank you. All right, go ahead and end the poll. Everybody okay? Let's end it. Excellent. Thank you so much. So before I reveal the answers, what I want you guys to kind of think about, and you don't have to put it in the poll yet or in the chat yet, but just kind of think about this. Did you enjoy reading this? How engaged were you while you were reading? And what did you notice kind of about your own process in trying to interpret and understand? And then I want to know, how confident do you feel about answering these questions? So yeah, just kind of consider that. Think about that. If you do want to share any of that in the chat, feel free to. But I'd like to kind of share the results here so we can see. Oh, the second question, everybody did pretty well on that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Mike, thank you. Yeah, okay. So here then we can see the second question, we're pretty united on the response. But the first one we were a little split, right? So I'm gonna stop sharing the results. You guys are awesome. No, didn't enjoy. Yes, okay. I'm sorry it was painful. But I'm gonna stop sharing, and what we'll do is I will share the results. All right, so for question number 1, it was indeed C. I know this was the one that we were a little bit more split on, but I'd like to say, number 2, you guys nailed it. But as we can see from the chat, you may not have enjoyed it, or you may have enjoyed it because it was the puzzle. Yeah, thank you for saying that, right? But it is something that you had to read several times, or you had to go back to. It was a lot of unknowns, correct? So what we want to think about is, why was the second question then perhaps easier to answer than the first one, or why were we split on that? Because here, if I show you the translation, what are Raalas? A cheetah. Yes, so for any of you who may have seen this type of exercise before, my coworker, Chris Richards, created this one, and it is a way to show us what happens, how do we respond when we are unfamiliar and uncertain about the vocabulary. It's interesting because, just spend a moment kind of looking over it now. Do you think, especially that first question, would it have been easier to answer now that you know the context And now that you know this vocabulary, yeah, yes. Oh, thank you, Deborah. Yeah, understand the frustration of those who read the letters and not understand what's going on. Yeah, it was a struggle. It wasn't enjoyable. So when you don't understand the context, then it could be that all of those options sounded kind of plausible, right? Because you're digging at the words and trying to figure out what do they mean, but as soon as then you know the context, you know the vocabulary, the answers become more logical, right? So one of the things we want to make sure is that we are helping students understand that they are not just kind of being tested on a standardized test, but also there's context. There's that deeper understanding. It's not just what's right in front of us. We have to dig into it in order to understand. And I wanted to put us in a place where we were feeling what maybe our students may be feeling, right? And that bit of a struggle. Because one of the most important things we can do as instructors is make sure that we are acknowledging that there is a disconnect. Yeah. Thanks, Bridget. I knew it because I knew it had words that were gibberish. Yes, exactly. That was the whole point. And I would urge you, try this with other tutors or other students, any way that you want to integrate it into your classroom. I think it's a great way just to show how when we are put in a situation where we were trying just so hard to read at that baseline level and at that surface level, that is so difficult to dig into what's underneath it. So one of the things then that we can help students understand is, what does comprehension truly mean? There are many different iterations and variations of the definition, but I really prefer this definition because comprehension is a conversation between the reader and the text. I love that word conversation because it means we have to be not only an active participant, but it involves that activity, right? It's really stressing that this is something that exists, not just words on a page, but there is a back and forth. Often when you talk to readers who are really engaged with what they're reading, they say things like, oh, I was putting myself into the text, or I could really relate, or I could see this, right? And it is that back and forth, that kind of creation of, I am a part of this dialogue. So one of the things we can do in our classrooms, and one of the activities I would urge you to try, is to ask students to think about examples of things they read in everyday life that they don't typically assume to be, I need to comprehend it, or I need to like read this really closely. One example I give is if someone texts you, right? Reading a text message is a form of reading, but it also then requires a lot of these comprehension skills that we might not even be aware of. For instance, if someone texts you up, that's something that you have to think about a variety of different factors. You have to think about who sent it, right? Was it a boss? Was it a friend? Was it a sibling? Also, then you want to think about, okay, what do I know about the author? What's my relationship to them? We also then want to consider, what's the context? What's the time of day? When is it being sent? What's the setting, right? If a coworker texts you at 8 a.m., you up, that could mean something very different than getting that text from a friend, correct? And then, of course, we want to understand tone and purpose, especially then in text messaging. That is something that you have to use these deciphering skills to really understand what the message is saying. And I always love this idea of using you up as an example, because I am the type of person that when I'm reading text or receiving text, punctuation is everything to me. If someone responds, I'm fine, without any kind of punctuation, I'm a little hesitant. I'm wondering, hey, are you fine? But it also then means I have to consider who sent that text message, what's my relationship to them, and how do I interpret this? So if we can reinforce and have students think about those types of examples in ways in which this is happening within their everyday lives, that's a way then to allow them to see it doesn't just exist within this academic context. Because one of the best things we can do for students and especially those resistant readers, is to see that they are already doing all of these things and already applying all of these different skills just in different ways in their everyday lives. For instance, if you think about having a conversation with a friend, and that friend is perhaps telling a story that's a little dramatic, right? You got to think about, okay, you have to determine the main idea. You have to cipher through what are the details they're providing. Often you're making inferences based on what do you know about that friend. You have to draw some conclusions. You got to evaluate the evidence that's before you, right? So one thing that you can do with students, again, is ask them to think about those examples, again, of ways that they read and reading comprehension is involved, and then to actually identify which types of these skills are they using when they're performing those tasks. Because once we have a solid understanding that I already use all these skills, and I just need to now apply it to a new context, to that academic context, we can help our students bridge that gap, right? And because we want to stress, it is not about ability, it's about familiarity. And the more familiar and the more comfortable you get applying these kinds of reading comprehension skills to different contexts, this will help not only allow students to feel like they can tackle this, but then hopefully be a little bit less resistant to the idea of working on reading comprehension skills, because you already got them. We're just honing them. All right. Are there any questions so far? I want to make sure. Hopefully you're putting them in the Q&A as well. Yeah. And thank you so much.
None yet.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Thanks,
No
Maribel.
problem.
Excellent. All right. So how do we actually bridge that gap for students to see how, oh, thanks, Mike. I see your question chart is ordered a little bit in a specific way, but also I just wanted to cover sort of the breadth of like all of the skills. So it's just to kind of show how we kind of move through them. Oh, yeah, thank you. First square might be kind of that immediate lower level skill. Yeah. But anyway, so how we help students bridge that gap. It's by using particular texts that will allow them to feel that support and see it in this particular academic context. One of the books that my organization uses and that I really enjoy is Scoreboost. And I love even just in the title, it's giving it away for us. So critical thinking for reading, science, and social studies. I want to stress this because often students may struggle with seeing the connection between, okay, the language arts section of the test, the science section of the test, the social studies section of the test, the math section of the test. We as educators may know that these skills are all connected and needed throughout every single section of the test, but that's not always immediately apparent to students. For instance, if you have a student who is working on maybe some social studies skills, but they're really struggling because their reading comprehension needs some work, that's a way we could talk to them about, let's look at the skills that are used in each one of these disciplines. So this text actually nicely brings that all together and allows us to see then that we have to use each one of these skills in all sections of the test. So this is the Scoreboost for the GED test. I want to just look kind of at some of these skills. So as we can see, understanding central ideas, supporting info, summarizing, inferences, generalizations, following a sequence, right? And then when we get into that synthesis, comparing and contrasting ideas, differentiating facts from opinion. All of this is so important for all sections of the GED or the high set. But what we want to do is help show those side by side. This text really allows students to see, here's an example of this within the language arts context. Here's an example of this within science. Here's an example of this within social studies, by having all different passages connected together. Yeah, I love Scoreboost, me too. Thank you. Now, you might notice, oh, New Readers Press Scoreboost for the high set. Let's see, can you find a difference between any of these. They should be very similar, right? Because what I want to stress is this is allowing students to gain the knowledge they need for that critical thinking and reading strategies across all disciplines, right? So now what I would urge everybody to do is join me for a workshop, because I'm going to be using these texts in the workshop to show you different examples of activities and lessons we could do together with students in order to help them see this is a needed whole. So thank you, Danielle. She is putting things in the chat for you, so please register for one of those workshops next week. I would love to see you there. And also one of the things too I wanted to point out is even when we can kind of get students to see that reading, science, and social studies are all connected in this way, one of the issues that they may still have is connecting it to math, seeing how reading comprehension is also so highly needed for math. But when we consider word problems, right, which, as we know, are the vast majority of these standardized tests, we want to think about, okay, what are some of the things that are needed? So even that first strategy, understand central ideas and supporting information. What's more important on a math word problem than being able to say, what is it asking? What's the main idea? And what info do I need to solve the problem? And then I love even too, something like following a sequence. That's something you absolutely have to do in math. So many of math word problems involve more than one step, right? Following the order of it. Being able to make those connections for students will help them see, by improving their reading comprehension skills, it far supersedes just one section of the test. It's not just something for that immediate, it goes so far beyond. All right, so we've identified the problem and kind of looked at this, but what we need to make sure we do is we dig deeper. So as I mentioned, and as some of you in the chat mentioned too, it's so important to address the why. It's very interesting because we often talk about active reading strategies and how we need to just get students to read actively. However, we spend a lot less time discussing why students may be reading passively, right? And here I'm gonna put passive and resistant kind of in that same category, because often what happens if you're a resistant reader, you are often a passive reader, right? And what we have to think about though is if you don't feel connected or interested in the text, you're not going to engage fully in it. And especially when we talk about the text used on the HSE exams, students do not feel connected, right? So how could we expect them to be fully engaged? And of course, then feeling a lack of ownership or authority. How often in school are you given the option to choose what you read? So in a traditional classroom setting, almost always the curriculum's already set or the materials are already set. And what are the stories that are already picked? Those classics, those canonical texts that everybody has to read. I'm putting quotation marks around that, right? I mean, I love some Great Gatsby, but I know for a fact not everybody else does. Even recently, I had a student tell me that he did not enjoy The Great Gatsby at all. And I shed a little metaphorical tear. But again, bearing in mind that we don't want to burden students with our expectations, I had to just pause and instead ask, okay, tell me why. So again, making sure that we're giving students the freedom to express how they are feeling and making sure we're able to dig deeper into why they may feel this way. And then when we are thinking about those classical canonical texts, the HSE texts, as we know, those can be very, very difficult to relate to. Those are not things we read in everyday life, right? Those are not things that feel like I can relate. I don't know about you guys. I did not grow up around Prohibition, so it can be difficult to then be like, yeah, I get the 1920s, I get the Roaring 20s, right? But we want to stress to students that they can develop these comprehension skills no matter what. No matter what. So, actually, even as Maribel said, encourage students to think about what they could read that would be interested in them. Absolutely, yeah. Get students to pick what are they interested in. How can we allow them to decide what they'd like to read, especially when working with adults. That idea of autonomy and authority over one's learning is so crucial, that if we can get students to practice with those skills, with materials that they enjoy, it's going to have a much better and productive experience. The other thing we want to kind of stress is asking students what they think. So with that Great Gatsby example, I wanted to know, why didn't my student enjoy it? Asking students, what do you think, and really giving them the freedom to answer is so important. Have you ever been in a classroom where you've been asked to interpret something and then you've been told you're just wrong? I actually had that experience in a graduate class where we were reading T.S. Eliot, and my professor asked, what does this mean? And instead of allowing us to do that, they immediately said, okay, here's what it means. And that completely eliminated any desire for us to try to even interpret it, if that is taken away from us. So that questioning of, what does it mean to you? Yes. Kate, thank you for putting that in the chat. That's awesome. What's in it for me? I love that. And finally then too, as I mentioned, students who may be struggling with reading as well. I recently read a quote that really resonated. It said that passive readers tend to conceive of reading as a decoding process rather than an active meaning-making process. So when students are struggling to understand what's literally on the page, they can't delve any deeper. So what we want to make sure is that we're getting our students to a level where they can do that meaning-making process. We've got to move beyond that, especially in relation then to what they're going to be asked to read on the HSE level texts. We have to be able to delve deeper into that thought process. All right, so what's one way we can help encourage students to think about this? Literacy narratives are a wonderful thing to introduce at the beginning of your class or sessions with students. A literacy narrative is a personal essay, and it allows students to explore their experiences. It allows them to reflect on how has that shaped your feelings about it, how has that shaped your current practices, and gives them an opportunity to think about their why. And I kind of want to ask you guys, so think about your own educational experiences. So if you want to share one that stands out very much to you, please do so. Because I already I shared mine about the graduate level class with T.S. Eliot. That's one that had very negatively kind of impacted me, right? So yeah, if you want to think about your own educational experiences, maybe if you feel comfortable sharing, you don't have to, but there's always a safe space to do so. But kind of in thinking about that, it's very polarizing, right? Often we remember the best or some of the worst educational experiences, right? So what we want to kind of do is ask students to consider some of these questions. I especially love the one about what's your first or most vivid memory of reading, right? We want to ask students to think about what are those educational experiences that really shaped you and shaped your understanding of perhaps your ability or your relationship with that. Yeah, oh, Kate, thank you for sharing. Yeah, thank you guys. Absolutely, when you think about those experiences and you begin to kind of reflect and understand how it has affected you moving forward, then you're able to start to change those. The other thing I really love about literacy narratives is that it gives students an opportunity to share their story, but also then it's an opportunity to have a conversation about what's changed. It's interesting when students may say, a particular book that had a lot of meaning to them as a child may have kind of drifted away from reading or may not enjoy it quite as much. And I like to ask students, like, what changed? Recently, I was having a conversation with my best friend, and we were talking about her playing pretend with her children and how somewhere along the line of like being an adult and growing up, she sort of lost her ability to like play pretend and use her imagination in the same way that she used to as a child. And isn't that something that unfortunately kind of happens where we often don't have spaces to play, to imagine, to take part in like this whimsy and creative process. And that's something that, if we're able to offer that for our students, that will give them a safe space to experiment, to try, to create and imagine. And that's so crucial then for getting into what it means to be an active reader, right? Because as we saw in that last slide, being an active reader is being curious, it's being interested in the topic, it's being able to fully engage with it. So then how do we help students build that once we're kind of at this place? We want to think about ways to build that in our classrooms. All right. So I would say there are 3 crucial C's in order to help students get to that kind of final big C of comprehension. One of the first ways that we can help students the most is by building comfortability in our classrooms. We need to make our classrooms spaces that are safe to, as I said, kind of explore, and reminding students that reading is that conversation. And so we have to use those skills. There has to be room for us to imagine and to create and to grow. If we don't have those spaces, especially as adults, we can't learn to do it independently. And again, when working with adult students, it is so important that they are the drivers of their own education. They want to be at the helm of their learning journeys. And a large part of that comes from feeling comfortable in that environment and feeling comfortable to build it. So with that idea in mind, we want to make sure that we are building that comfortability in our classrooms. And one of the best ways that we can do that is to develop a rapport with students, give space to share stories. As I mentioned, we're able to use those literacy narratives. I would recommend doing it very early on in the semester or in the beginning of the class, if that's what it is, or your first few interactions with students. But that gives an opportunity to build a little bit of rapport, get to know them, and then ask for their input. So I know that often we are beholden to the materials that we have available. However, if you're able to offer students choice, even within the text that perhaps you have to use or that were assigned to you, allowing students to preview those texts. So for instance, if you have, a New Reader's Press book, the Scoreboost, and then you have a Kaplan book, allowing students to look at both of those texts and preview them to see, okay, which one might work best for me, because they are written differently, and we want to, again, give that kind of agency to students, give that authority. And yes, Maribel, thank you. Yeah, there are a variety of ways to encourage that, and I would stress, if you haven't already, apply for that ProLiteracy scholarship that was mentioned earlier. That's a way to get more material so that you have variety in the classroom. And then once you kind of get into the work and having students practice reading, reinforce, again, what they already do well. At any chance you get, make sure you are reinforcing that students are already doing these skills well, and that we are now just applying it to that different context. Because one thing we can do is make sure that we are demystifying academic texts. So as we know, as it's been mentioned a couple of times, those HSC level texts are difficult. They are often written from over 100 years ago, right? They are in the canon. But what we can do is to help find materials that are perhaps written at a more approachable level. So for instance, I love giving students Little Women at a different reading level that is more appropriate, perhaps a lower reading level, and allowing them to get comfortable with that kind of text, that kind of classical text, and then ramping up to the original text. So if they're able to kind of see it and understand what's going on in the story, and then we move to that more academic version of it, it's great to do a side-by-side comparison, great to look at how that works. And also, those kinds of classical texts are marvelous for dramatic readings, especially with that kind of language and the vocabulary and even the sentence structure. There's ways to encourage comfortability with it by dramatizing those readings, or asking students to like rewrite some dialogue or rewrite perhaps like what that character was wearing that day, like imagining this in a way that we can make those texts more approachable, because we want to demystify that idea that you can only do this within this academic context. And then, of course, we want to give room for growth and improvement. Ask students for their interpretations. Always, always, always. One thing I would say, one of my favorite things that I tell students is you can argue almost anything as long as you can find it and support it in the text. So make sure that you are reiterating to students that they can, or that their opinions are worth voicing. They don't have to be afraid, because often when we think about it, it's very difficult to be wrong, right? We don't like to admit when we are struggling with something or when we don't understand it. So providing a space then where it is okay for that to happen is so crucial. And it starts then from yourself as the instructor or as the tutor. You want to make sure that you acknowledge your own mistakes. And this is something that takes time. It doesn't happen magically overnight. And same with the way that we talk to our students, right? These skills take time to develop. It's the same thing with this. This will take time to build these levels of comfortability with your students. But you want to be able to do so because it's at the core of those building blocks for what we need to get to full comprehension of materials. The next thing we can do is make sure we build community. Make reading a social activity. It is so wonderful when you are able to share what you're reading, when you're able to share your ideas. And one of the first places we can start that is as the instructor or as the tutor, show your passion for it. As I mentioned, you want to make sure there's a balance, but if there are materials that you are really excited about, passion is infectious. It's something that we can get our students feeling more comfortable and confident with something if they see you being comfortable and confident with it. So make sure then that that level of excitement comes from you first as well. And again, with reading being a social activity, I would always say, I know reading aloud can be a little intimidating, but try it because you can model it for students. It's a great way then to build kind of that level of trust. But also you can hear words kind of come up off the page. We want to remind students that it's not just something stuck and something that only exists within that specific context, right? So actually another thing that I'd love to talk about more, but not right now, is building book clubs. And so actually I'm going to ask Danielle, I have a couple of other presentations that I've done in previous years of Teacher Trainer Plus. So if Danielle could put those into the chat, I'd really appreciate it because those give some hints about how you can start building more of this as well and building that comfortability and community with reading. And our final piece then is creativity. One of the first things we can do is ask our students to reflect on their reading as a process. So as I mentioned, asking students, what do you notice while you're reading? What are your reactions? How do you feel when you have to read something? It's a way to make sure that we are seeing reading not only as this sort of stagnant and than sitting in a chair doing nothing but looking at a page, right? We want it to come up off the page for students. So thinking about your reading as a process. And then making sure that reading is a visual, asking students to create visuals, things that they connected to. There's ways to connect to different images. So perhaps you're reading a passage and you ask students to think about, well, what comes to mind? Draw me a picture, find it, on your phone, find something on your phone online that really reminds you of what's happening in this text. And I always love connecting reading to music as well. I think it's a wonderful way to show that everything comes together. There's that intersectionality with all of this. Because what we really want to do is make sure that students are constructing meaning. So recently, there was a study done in 2020 where they actually used text scrolls within their classroom. So Danielle, I'm going to have you put in the chat, if you don't mind, a link to the article that was written. But at the post-secondary level, they created these text scrolls that allowed their students to physically interact with the text. They printed them out, they taped each of the pieces side by side, and they asked students to get in groups and put it up on the wall, highlight things as needed. Thinking outside of the box to get our students really thinking about reading as that meaning making and creative process. So I would encourage you all to try those things. And unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go into everything. So instead, what I'm going to have you do is sign up for one of my workshops so that we can, again, continue this conversation. Thank you, Danielle, putting in the chat one more time. So please, this, again, is just the beginning. But in each one of these workshops, I'm going to make sure that we delve deeper into this topic. Oh, Kathy, I want to talk to you. Sign up for a workshop, please. Creative suggestions. Yes, I want to go into so many of those with you. And also finding out what's going to work best for your classroom or for your students. It's a lot of experimentation. So please sign up for a workshop. I would love to get into more of this with you. And so I think we will go to some questions.
Sure. Laura asked, we use Scoreboost, but do you have any recommendations for extra readings to apply these skills?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. Are we talking about like academic texts, or are we talking about non-academic texts? Or it doesn't matter because, oh, Laura, thank you, academic texts. So one of my go-to texts that I use would be The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin, because that's often seen on the HSE tests, but it's something that has so much to be explored within it. I absolutely love using that story. Also, this isn't one that would necessarily be on the HSE test, but it's that type of academic. It's a nonfiction piece called Hidden Intellectualism by Gerald Graft. And it talks about what does it mean to be an academic and how do we use non-academic interests and read them academically. So I would recommend those things right off the bat, but I can definitely send you more suggestions if you would like, and can build a list for you, but those are the two that immediately come to mind. Yeah, absolutely, Laura. And hey, good to see you. Glad you're back. Any other questions?
That's it, Kara.
Excellent. Ah, thanks. Yeah, I can't wait to see you guys. Yes, so please, if you would sign up for those workshops. Like I said, as with all of my presentations, this is just the beginning. I would love to get to know you, get to know your students, come up with those ideas together. So here are the upcoming webinars. There will be a few coming up both before and after ProLiteracy. And then what I want to make sure too is that you're able to get the QR code for this short survey. So please let me know what you thought of the presentation today, what you want to see more of. I'm always happy to create content around what you need. So please share that with us, and I'd be happy to reach out. All right.
Thank you, Kara.
Yeah. All right. And thank you guys all so much for being here today. I really, really appreciate it. Yeah. And I'm so glad to see so many names in the chat that I recognize. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.